Because I do things differently. Because I don't go by a rule book. Because I lead from the heart, not the head.
3 days after the Tuesday meeting at Buckingham Palace, where William had placed a 14-page document on the table and told Camilla directly what he intended to do with it, a sealed envelope arrived at Clarence House. It was not delivered through the standard palace communication channel. It did not come from William's household, or from the palace legal office, or from any of the institutional addresses that Camilla's private secretary was accustomed to receiving official correspondence from. It came by hand, carried by a single aide who arrived at Clarence House on a Friday morning, asked for Camilla's private secretary personally, placed the envelope in her hands without explanation, and left without waiting for any response or acknowledgement. The envelope was cream-colored, the kind of heavy-quality stationery that has been used in royal correspondence for generations. The handwriting on the front was precise and immediately recognizable to anyone who had received a communication from the same source before. It was Princess Anne's handwriting. Inside was a single page, handwritten, not typed, not dictated to an aide and transcribed, written in Anne's own hand in the specific, careful way that people write things they want to ensure are received exactly as intended, with no possibility of misinterpretation or subsequent dispute about what was actually said. Camilla's private secretary brought it to her immediately. Camilla read it alone in her private sitting room at Clarence House, with the door closed and no staff present. She read it once. Then she sat with it for a long time without moving. What Princess Anne wrote in that single handwritten page, why she chose to write it privately rather than say it in the meeting room 3 days earlier, what it confirmed about the specific institutional future that was now waiting for Camilla on the other side of Charles's reign, and what Camilla did in the hours after reading it that the palace staff who were present that Friday afternoon have described as unlike anything they had seen from her before. This is that story. Before we go any further, if you are new to Palace Drop, subscribe now and hit the bell. We cover the royal family the way it actually happens, not the managed version, the human story underneath it. If you watched our last video, you know exactly what the Tuesday meeting contained, and why Anne's letter 3 days later is the moment that completed what that meeting started. If you missed it, it is linked at the end of this video, and I strongly recommend watching it because the two stories connect in a way that makes both of them hit harder. Stay with us. The question that the people familiar with the account of that Friday morning have consistently returned to is this. Anne had been in the room on Tuesday. She had sat beside William and Catherine while William placed the document on the table and explained to Camilla what Clause 7 meant and what he intended to do about it. She had been present for everything. She had heard everything said. Why did she write a letter 3 days later rather than simply saying in the meeting room whatever she felt needed to be said? The answer requires understanding something specific about how Anne operates that most coverage of her character misses. Anne never speaks in a room when she believes the room is not ready to hear what she needs to say. The Tuesday meeting had been William's meeting, his document, his institutional decision, his direct communication to Camilla about what he intended to do with the authority that Charles's signature had given him. Anne had been present to provide institutional weight and historical context, but the meeting had not been hers to lead or to use as the occasion for her own communication with Camilla. She had sat with what she needed to say for 3 days, not because she was uncertain about it, because she was deciding the right form for it. A conversation could be interrupted, deflected, managed, or responded to in real time, in ways that allowed the person receiving it to control some part of what was happening. A handwritten letter on cream-heavy stationery from Princess Anne arriving at Clarence House on a Friday morning could not be interrupted or deflected or managed. It could only be received. Anne had decided that what she needed to say to Camilla deserved to be received rather than merely heard. So she wrote it down. Drop in the comments right now where you are watching from, country or city below. We want to know where the Palace Drop community is based. Drop it below and stay with us. because what Anne wrote in that single handwritten page is the part of this story that completes everything we have been covering on this channel for weeks. To understand the weight of a letter from Anne, you need to understand what Anne represents inside the institution and inside the specific history of the Wales marriage that sits underneath everything in this story. Princess Anne is 75 years old. She has served the crown without scandal, without deviation, and without complaint for over 50 years. She has attended more public engagements annually than almost any other working royal for most of her adult life. She has never given a tabloid interview. She has never sought personal publicity. She has never placed her own comfort or preferences above what the institution required of her. She was present for all of it. The Wales marriage breaking down across the late 1980s and into the catastrophic public years of the early 1990s. Diana's documented suffering inside an institution that consistently chose to manage her rather than support her. The Camilla Gate tapes, Charles's television confession, Diana's panorama interview, Diana speaking about there being 3 people in her marriage, the divorce, Diana's death in Paris, the 5 days before the flag was lowered, the funeral, everything. Anne was there for all of it, and she managed her private feelings about all of it, the way she manages everything, professionally, without public statement. Maintaining the institutional discipline that the role required, even when what she was watching made that discipline extraordinarily difficult. She watched Diana suffer. She watched the woman associated with Diana's suffering become queen consort, sit beside her brother at the coronation, wear the tiara, take the seat, and she maintained her composure through all of it. For nearly 30 years, a handwritten letter from Anne arriving 3 days after William's Tuesday meeting at Buckingham Palace was not a routine piece of royal correspondence. It was 30 years of disciplined institutional silence finally deciding to speak. The letter was 1 page, Anne's precise, careful handwriting filling approximately 3/4 of the cream stationery. The people familiar with its existence and with Camilla's reaction to reading it have described its content in terms that reflect its specific emotional weight without reproducing its exact language. Anne did not write about Clause 7 or the 14-page document or the succession planning framework. She left the institutional dimension of Camilla's situation to the document itself and to William's direct communication in the Tuesday meeting. What she wrote about was Diana, not in the accusatory way that public commentary about the Wales marriage has always framed things, not in the language of grievance or blame, or the specific attribution of fault that the public narrative has spent 30 years constructing and reconstructing. In the specific quiet way that a woman who loved her sister-in-law and watched her suffer writes about that suffering when she has decided that the moment for silence has finally passed. She wrote about specific things she had seen and heard across the years when Diana was alive. Not things that the public record had captured, things that had happened inside the family in private, moments that Anne had witnessed or that had been communicated to her by Diana herself. Moments that confirmed the specific quality of Diana's suffering in ways that the public version of the story had never fully captured. She wrote about what Diana had asked her for privately across the years when the marriage was visibly deteriorating. The specific things Diana had needed from the people around her who understood what was happening and who had the institutional position to potentially do something about it. What she had asked for and what she had received in response. She wrote about what Diana had said to her about hope, in the specific language that people use when they are speaking to someone they trust about things that matter to them deeply. The hopes Diana had expressed about her sons, about the institution she had tried so hard to change from inside despite consistently not being supported in that effort, about what she believed the monarchy could become if it found the courage to be honest about what it had cost the people who served it. And then Anne wrote about what she had observed in the years since Diana's death, the rehabilitation process, the careful management of public perception, the institutional embrace of the woman who had been at the center of what Diana suffered, the coronation, the tiara, the seat beside the king. She did not use the word wrong. She did not use the words accusation or blame or fault. She used different words. She wrote that she had watched it all in the specific way that people watch things they cannot change, and that they choose not to speak about publicly because speaking publicly would serve their own feelings, rather than any genuine institutional purpose. She wrote that she had chosen her silence for 30 years because she believed the institution required it, and because she trusted that time would eventually produce an outcome that served something more important than her own feelings about what she had witnessed. She wrote that the outcome had now arrived in the form that she believed Diana would have understood if she had lived to see it. And she wrote that she was writing this letter not to wound Camilla or to extend any personal conflict between them, but to ensure that Camilla understood something that Anne believed she deserved to understand clearly. That the institutional outcome of the document that Charles had signed was not simply the result of administrative language or succession planning frameworks or the legitimate authority of an heir managing his inheritance. It was the result of an institution finally moving in the direction that Diana had always believed it needed to move. Not toward any individual's victory, toward something closer to honesty. Anne signed the letter with her full name in the same precise handwriting that had filled the rest of the page. Then she sealed it in the cream envelope and sent it by hand to Clarence House. Camilla read the letter alone in her private sitting room at Clarence House on a Friday morning, with the door closed. She had not known what to expect when her private secretary brought her an envelope in Anne's handwriting, 3 days after the Tuesday meeting. The meeting itself had been difficult enough. William's document, the specific language of Clause 7, the direct communication about what he intended to authorize and what he did not. She had spent 3 days processing what the Tuesday meeting had confirmed about the shape of her life after Charles. She had not been expecting a handwritten letter from Anne. She read it once, slowly, with the specific attention that the precise, careful handwriting demanded. Then she sat with it in her hands in the quiet of her private sitting room for a period that the staff who were waiting outside the door described as significantly longer than her usual processing time for correspondence. There was no sound from inside the room. When Camilla's private secretary knocked gently after 40 minutes to ask if she required anything, the answer that came back through the door was a single word: no. She remained alone in the sitting room for another hour. When she eventually emerged, the staff present described her expression as something they did not have a word for in the professional language of palace observation. Not anger, not distress, not the composed institutional expression that she had learned to maintain across decades of navigating difficult situations inside the royal family. Something quieter than any of those things. Something that looked, to the people who were watching, like someone who had received information they had always known was coming, and had spent years believing they were prepared for, and had discovered in the moment of receiving it that preparation is not the same as readiness. She asked her secretary to cancel her afternoon appointments. Then she returned to her private sitting room and closed the door again. Subscribe to Palace Drop right now and hit the bell. This is the channel that maps the complete story. Every document, every letter, every private moment that connects the events you have been watching unfold across these videos into one picture. Subscribe now so you never miss what comes next. In the 2 weeks following the Friday morning when Anne's letter arrived at Clarence House, several things happened inside the palace that the people familiar with the period describe as connected to what Camilla had read. She requested a private meeting with Charles, not their usual evening time together, a formal private meeting in his study, the kind of meeting that is scheduled through private secretaries and that carries a different register from ordinary husband and wife conversation. Charles made time for it the following Monday. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. The people outside the study door knew only its duration, what passed inside it between a husband and a wife, about a letter from his sister and a document he had signed on a Thursday afternoon as item 17 of a weekly administrative bundle, is not part of any public record. What is part of the observable record is what came after. In the weeks following that 2-hour meeting, Camilla made a series of quiet decisions that the people close to her observed, and that they have described as reflecting a shift in how she understood her situation. She began a process of consolidating her personal affairs that the people closest to her describe as someone preparing for a transition rather than resisting one. Not dramatically, not visibly, in the specific quiet way that people who have faced the reality of an outcome they cannot reverse begin to organize themselves around that reality rather than against it. She spoke to her son Tom Parker Bowles, a long private conversation that Tom later described to people close to him as the most honest conversation he had ever had with his mother. What she told him is not known specifically. What he said afterward to the people he trusted enough to say anything to was that he had finally understood something about his mother that he had not understood before. She requested access to the private archive of correspondence between herself and Charles from the years before they married. Not the official correspondence, the personal letters, the decades of private communication between two people who loved each other across years when that love had significant institutional costs for both of them. She spent several afternoons over the following weeks reading through those letters alone. The people who observed her during that period describe a woman who was doing something that Anne's letter had perhaps made possible in a way that the Tuesday meeting's institutional clarity had not. She was saying goodbye, not to Charles, not to the life they had built together, not to the love that had been at the center of her adult life for decades, to the version of herself that had believed the title and the coronation and the seat beside the king represented something permanent. Something that the document and the meeting and the letter had now confirmed was something else entirely, temporary, tied to a reign, subject to the authority of the man who would succeed it. She was saying goodbye to the permanence she had believed she had finally achieved, and she was doing it privately, without drama, without public statement, in the specific dignified way that Anne's letter had perhaps invited her to do it. William called Anne the Friday evening after the envelope had been delivered to Clarence House. He had not known Anne was going to write. She had not told him. She had not consulted him, or asked his permission, or discussed the contents with him before sending it. She had made the decision herself, on her own terms, and had acted on it in her own time. He called to tell her he knew. Anne answered on the second ring. William told her he had heard that the letter had been delivered, that Camilla had canceled her afternoon appointments, that the staff at Clarence House had described her as unlike herself for the rest of that Friday. Anne said simply that she had written what needed to be written. William asked her what she had said. Anne told him it was between her and Camilla. William was quiet for a moment. Then he told his aunt that whatever she had written he trusted, it had served a purpose that the Tuesday meeting had not been designed to serve. Anne said she believed it had. Then she said something that William has not spoken about publicly, but that the people familiar with the account of that phone call have described as the most significant thing said between the two of them across an alliance that has been building quietly for years. She told William that Diana would have written it herself if she had lived, that the words might have been different, the specific details, the particular things she would have chosen to say, and the particular things she would have chosen to leave out. But the essential communication, the act of finally saying privately what had been maintained publicly as silence for 30 years, Diana would have wanted to do that herself if the institution and the circumstances had ever given her the space to do it. Anne had done it in her place. William did not speak for a long moment after she said that. Then he thanked her. Anne told him there was nothing to thank her for. It was simply what needed to happen. 3 documents have defined the arc of Camilla's position inside the British monarchy across the past 12 months. The 14-page reform framework that Charles signed on a Thursday afternoon as item 17 of a weekly administrative bundle containing the 6 words in Clause 7 that gave William the authority to end her institutional future by default. The private communication in the Tuesday meeting room at Buckingham Palace, where William placed that document on the table and told Camilla directly what he intended to do with it, and the single handwritten page that arrived at Clarence House on a cream envelope 3 days later in Princess Anne's precise, careful handwriting. Each document did something the previous one could not. The reform framework established the institutional reality. The Tuesday meeting made that reality personal and direct. Anne's letter made it human, not in the sense of making it kinder or softer or easier to receive, in the sense of connecting the institutional outcome of a succession planning document to the 30-year human story that had always been its real foundation. The document said what would happen to Camilla's position. The meeting said who had decided it and why. The letter said what it meant, in the context of everything that had come before it, in the context of Diana, in the context of what the institution had cost Diana, and what it owed her in some form that it could now finally begin to pay. Anne had not written the letter to wound Camilla. She had written it to ensure that Camilla understood something that the institutional language of Clause 7 and the measured professional communication of the Tuesday meeting could not fully convey. That what was happening was not simply succession planning. It was an institution slowly and finally moving towards something closer to honesty about what it had done and what it owed and what it was now trying to become. Not perfectly, not without cost to people who had their own complicated relationships to the story. Not in ways that would ever fully satisfy everyone who had watched what happened to Diana from the inside or the outside, but moving in the direction Diana had always believed it needed to move. Anne had spent 30 years watching and waiting for that movement. She had written the letter because she believed the moment had finally arrived, when saying so privately to the person who most needed to understand it was not only possible but necessary. And in the quiet of her private sitting room at Clarence House on a Friday morning, Camilla had read the letter and understood. Not agreed, not accepted without complexity or pain or the specific grief of a woman who had fought for and won something she had believed was permanent, discovering that permanence was not what she had been given. But understood. The distinction matters. Understanding something is not the same as being defeated by it. It is the beginning of knowing how to live with it. 3 days after the Tuesday meeting, a sealed envelope arrived at Clarence House in Princess Anne's handwriting. 30 years of institutional silence, finally deciding that the moment had come to speak. Not in anger, not in triumph, in the specific quiet voice of a woman who had watched everything from inside and had chosen her silence for 3 decades because she believed the institution required it, and who had finally decided that the institution now required something else: honesty. Written in cream stationery, in precise, careful handwriting, and delivered by hand on a Friday morning to the woman who most needed to receive it. Camilla read it alone. She canceled her afternoon appointments. She sat with the door closed for a long time, and something in her understanding of her own situation shifted in the way that things shift when you receive information you have always known was coming, and discover in the moment of receiving it that knowing something is coming is not the same as being ready for it. Anne wrote what Diana would have written if she had lived, 30 years late, but finally said, and in the specific quiet of a private sitting room at Clarence House on a Friday morning, the words finally landed where Diana had always needed them to land. With the woman who had been at the center of everything, reading them alone, without anyone watching. Subscribe to Palace Drop and hit the bell. Every week we go deeper on the stories the palace does not want mapped. The palace has a version of every story. This is the other one. There is one more detail from that Friday at Clarence House that has not yet been told. After Camilla's second hour alone in her sitting room, her private secretary was finally admitted back into the room. Camilla handed her Anne's letter and gave her a single instruction. She told her to have it placed in the private family correspondence archive alongside the letters Charles had written to her across the decades before they married. Not filed, not documented, not entered into any official record, simply placed beside the letters that represented the other side of the same story. What that instruction reveals about how Camilla ultimately received what Anne wrote and what it means for the relationship between the two women going forward is the story coming next to this channel. Subscribe now and hit the bell so you are here when it drops.